Have you ever felt like you're on the precipice of understanding something truly profound about yourself, yet it remains just out of reach? That's where Jeffrey Brunk comes in, a shamanic healer, Usui Reiki master, and spiritual counselor who will share his wisdom and understanding of the delicate balance of light and shadow. Explore the unseen realms with Jeffrey as your guide, one who has traversed these paths, facing his own wounds to emerge as an everyday shaman. Jeffrey's journey through shamanic practice, shadow work, and energy healing unveils the intricate ways in which these forces shape our physical, spiritual, and emotional well-being. Whether you're taking the initial steps towards inner betterment or you're further along on your path, there is something within this podcast that will resonate with you. Delve into the essence of what it means to navigate life's challenges with an everyday shaman's insight and discover the joy and purpose that can be found even in chaos. Join the Everyday Shaman in an extraordinary journey in which we will explore topics that could very well change the way you perceive the dance of light and shadow in your life and the world around you. A journey to greater self-awareness and the unseen world around us. Welcome to the Everyday Shaman.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Shaman. My name's Jeff Brunk, your host, and my guest today is Dan Ramsay. Dan's a great guy with an amazing story of transformation to tell, and he's currently employed as a Major League Baseball scout and talent evaluator, grading the on-field ability of high school and college athletes, as well as evaluating their off-field character traits. Prior to his time in professional baseball, he worked as the field manager in player development with a different professional organization. So in other words, Dan was a professional baseball coach. Before professional baseball, Dan was the head baseball coach at a small Christian college for 9 years, while also serving as an adjunct instructor in the kinesiology department. Dan earned a Master of Education in Administrative Leadership, and during his undergraduate work, studied secondary education with endorsements in kinesiology and English as a second language. Dan has long had a passion for other cultures, and English as a second language was a great avenue for him to learn and create relationships with those who might be different than himself. He knew within himself that he wanted to be able to work in a profession that put relationships at the forefront. Dan has been happily married for 13 years and has 4 children, 2 girls, ages 8 and 11, and 2 boys, ages 6 and 4. Oh, and let's not omit the 2 golden retrievers. So basically, Dan and his wife have 6 children. He and his family live on a small 1-acre farm in the beautiful Pacific Northwest and raise chickens, grow plums, pears, apples, raspberries, blueberries, and strawberries, as well as cultivating as many vegetables as they can in the family's garden. All of this seems like a lot, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Like so many others, 2020 drew a line in the sand between the old Dan and the new Dan. The global pandemic opened his eyes to the corruption of evil in our world and caused him to embark on a journey that has enlightened him in ways he'd never imagined, including increased curiosity and thinking for himself while gaining an incredible amount of knowledge. So welcome, Dan, to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Awesome, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Sure. You've got said tip of the iceberg. There's so much to your story outside of baseball. And I'm really interested to hear more about how 2020, the pandemic, it changed so many people, opened so many people's eyes. And it's especially great to hear that coming from a male. And I've said this in my debut podcast, that it's not a common thing for men to come forward and admit they started seeing things in a new way. It's a form of enlightenment. In a lot of ways, people see that or hear that word and they think new agey things, and that's not the way it is. And I know how it was for a lot of others, and I imagine it was sort of the same way for you.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think as part of that, maybe being male, being a little more insecure about being vulnerable with others. But for me, it really started just prior to 2020. You mentioned earlier, I have 4 children. My oldest daughter, we were having a really difficult time with her. She was highly emotional, highly sensitive, struggling to cope with many things that we didn't think, it didn't come across as normal. And we were struggling for answers. my wife and we came across a term, and I'm not big on labels, but we came across a term called the highly sensitive personality trait. And as we read about it, as we researched it, a lot of what we were reading just it connected with what we were seeing in our daughter. There was one of those quizzes you can take online, and I'm sure we've seen a lot of them. A lot of times it's a hook to try to get you to give them an email address for a product or whatever it happens to be. But this quiz was a quiz about the highly sensitive personality trait. And I sat down with my 5-year-old at the time and asked her a lot of the questions, and some of them I had to answer for her because she couldn't really articulate it. But I started to see this pattern of things where I thought this has got to be some sort of gimmick, because I would answer the same thing to just about every one of these. So I went to my mom. I called my mom and said, "Mom, I'm going to run some questions by you real quick and just curious what you're going to answer." And I gave my mom the same quiz, and it was a 20 question quiz. And it basically said that if you answer yes to more than 9 of the questions, that you likely have the highly sensitive personality trait. And like I said, I think I answered 19 out of the 20 to yes. And I thought that's interesting. My daughter was the same. But when I asked my mom, she only answered 4 of the 20 yes. And I was taken aback. And then I went to my wife and I asked her the same questions, and same thing. I was dumbfounded. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that other people weren't affected by things the same way that I was. And this is as a 35, 36-year-old man learning something new about myself. So as I
It came
said, it
about.
kind of,
It came about in such a offhanded. I mean, you're doing this for your daughter, trying to figure this out, and then you find something out
yeah.
about yourself. The way these things happen sometimes is amazing.
Well, and yeah, so that was kind of what got the ball rolling to this idea that maybe there was more to me than I knew, if that makes sense. Shortly after that, my wife and I decided that we wanted to bring a foreign exchange student into our home. You mentioned earlier that I had a passion for other cultures, and my wife does as well. So the idea of bringing a student from a different part of the world into our home was really exciting. We thought it would be good for our children. So we had an exchange student from South Korea. She was awesome. We had a good time with her. But I recognized really, really quickly that I had some pretty unhealthy traits in regards to people pleasing. I think when you're in your own home, under your own roof, you kind of can be yourself. And then when you have a stranger in the home, we tend to sometimes maybe put on a mask or act in a certain way that we want others to perceive us. And I recognized really quickly with a stranger in our home that I was being two very different people in public versus in private. A lot of that centered around trying to please others. And it became to the point where it was quite unhealthy because I wasn't taking care of myself. Just in, and this is something, Jeff, you and I have talked about in the past, but the ability to retreat, to disappear when you might need to seek out solitude in those times where maybe the energies are just a bit too high,
Mhm.
and really all you need is some time alone. And this is still a challenge of mine. I have 4 kids, so obviously my house is packed.
Yeah,
and
a lot
and
going on.
there's also some shame and guilt involved when you just want to say, "Hey, I'm out, guys. I need a break, honey. You can hang out with all 4 of them for a bit." But so always continuing challenges, and obviously I feel like I've experienced so much growth in this process. But kind of back to that story, I started to really dive into who I was and kind of what made me tick, and started to realize that I had some ugly traits. I had some good traits and some positive traits, but I had some other things too that I needed to face. And that's kind of how the process started for me. I stumbled across the meditation and journeying and shamanism in a much different way, but it all leads back to my daughter. And it was actually how I was introduced to you, Jeff. We were struggling with with her behavior and her sensitivities and some of her high emotions. And again, I was starting to uncover some of this in myself. My mother-in-law, she's a bit of an esoteric thinker. I guess you could call her that. But I mean, she does like remote healing and muscle testing and some things like that. So she's more open-minded. She just reached out and said, "Hey, maybe you should try to have somebody do a shamanic journey on your daughter's behalf." And the man she recommended was you. So I emailed you. Yeah, yeah, I
So
emailed you. And
curiously,
just,
how did she find me? I
you know
mean,
what? I have no idea. I have no idea. But obviously it was divine. So,
yeah.
um, but so yeah, I reached out to you. You did a journey on her behalf, and I didn't even know what a shamanic journey was. Honestly, it was right around the time that there was like the January 6th Capitol deal, and there was a shaman on TV who had like US flag. So it was the first time I'd ever even heard the term before. Um,
I hated
uh,
that. I hated that
yeah,
when that
right.
image. I'm
I
thinking,
do now.
like you, I'm not big on labels. And when it was my editor, when I was writing my memoir, that wanted to call the book The Everyday Shaman, and I didn't want to call myself a shaman. I think it's a very revered profession, and there's a history to it. Just like I eschew titles, I don't want to be called a Reiki master. I just it's an ego thing to me.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
right there with you. I agree.
yeah, but it's at the same time what people search for when they're looking for help. So
Yeah.
I'd really be interested to know how she found me across country like that. But
Yeah, yeah.
I've had other people
Well,
tell
and
me
actually
stories
across
similar.
borders because she's Canadian. So,
Oh wow.
yeah, yeah. So she found a tie, and we needed it at the time, and I needed it. I was amazingly fascinated by your response and what you shared. And I shortly after that had asked you to do a journey on my behalf, because I had experienced some things and some dreams that I couldn't quite make sense of. And I thought maybe your insight in the spirit realm would help that. And what you came back to me with was, I mean, to this day, I, there's no way, there's no way you could have known the landscape that you entered when you went into your journey was the landscape that I've had reoccurring dreams about from the time I was 10 years old. And you described it to a T, and it just blew my mind. Like it was, I mean, this was a reoccurring dream I've had most of my life along a beach with a rock pier going out into the ocean, and it's a spooky dream for me, but it's happened multiple times, and you journeyed on my behalf and you described that place to me, and it was one of those moments where they say like you become a believer in something if you want to put it that way. It was just like, man, there is absolutely something to this because that man, this stranger, could not have known that about me. And then to take it even further, as you encountered some animals and some different things in that dream, they very much resonated with me and what I was going through and experiencing at that time. So yeah, but at the end of the day, it was all confirmation that I was on this path. It wasn't necessarily by choice, but I'm so incredibly grateful and happy to be on it. So
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. I don't have many people that share with me things like that. It's like sometimes I ask my wife, it'd be nice to get some validation, sometimes because I don't know from a lot of times. So it's nice to hear that. So I appreciate you sharing. And this all happened after you had done the test. You had first with your daughter doing the test, and so you were already opening up your insights to yourself. How long had the dreams? I mean, have you always had really vivid dreams and or prophetic dreams or whatever? However
yeah,
they lead you.
it's pretty fascinating actually. Like dreams have always been a very significant part of my life. I mean, dating back to as long as I can remember. I mean, I remember waking up in the morning and recalling dreams with my dad almost daily. Where they started to kind of get interesting is I mean, some of the earliest ones I had, like I said, these reoccurring dreams where I had one where I was basically running from a volcano and my only escape was this rock pier out into the ocean. And it reoccurred many times in my life. I've had reoccurring dreams where I'm in a different time period, but they don't, I've kind of talked about this before. They don't feel like a normal dream. It's almost an experience.
Like you're living in a story.
Yeah, like I'm
Yeah.
living in a story and I can feel what the characters are feeling and it feels like I'm there, but I don't really, it just, there's no connection to it. And then, back in, it's been 10 years now, 2014, I lost a dear friend of mine in a plane crash. It was prominent news. It was all over ESPN. He was the assistant scouting or the assistant athletic director at Illinois State University, and he died after the Final Four in a private plane crash.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, just a dear friend of mine. And about a month after his death, I I dreamt that I met him in a cafe, and he talked to me for a long time. And I woke up from that dream and I wrote everything down that we had discussed. But he said some things that just didn't make sense to me. He talked to me about enjoying mirror. He said, "You're going to really enjoy mirror." And I didn't know what that meant. And I wrote that in my notes on my phone, like, I don't know what that means. And 3 months later, a close friend of ours contacted me and said, "Hey, let's go hike Camp Rainier. Like we're going to go Mount Rainier. We're going to hike up to base camp." And I said, "Cool." And we got up to base camp and it was named after John
Oh,
Muir.
wow.
And we went to Camp Muir. And there's no way that I could have known. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know that even existed. So,
You research the dreams after you have them?
you
Is
know, I hadn't at that point, but I started to the most prominent dream I had, and I honestly, I kind of, I say this is the one that was the awakening dream. The one that really got me was 2019. I was summoned by a great horned owl in my sleep, and it spooked the daylights out of me. I mean, to the point where I didn't sleep for a couple of days following it because it just felt so real. And in that dream, I let the owl. It was in my hotel room. It was in my hotel room just terrorizing me. And I let it out and it flew out and I watched it fly into the pine trees. And immediately after that, I just felt the need to research it. And this is kind of, I think, where this whole path started for me. But the more I dug, it was like, Google, right? Like I don't use Google anymore. I used to use Google, but anyway, I Google like, hey, what does an owl dream mean? And it's like, well, Native Americans think it means death, and this culture thinks it means wisdom and darkness. And it was just like I kind of found myself gravitating toward what I wanted to hear, you know? Like, oh, that's a positive thing. I'll just stick to that. It means a good thing, or it means the death of this, or whatever it happens to be. And I kind of didn't think much of it. I kind of wrote it off. I joked about it with a few friends, a few family members. My dad jokingly said it might be your grandma Theta's spirit. And maybe it was, but
well, those dream interpretations, after I do, after I do a shamanic journey and I write up a summary and I make it as detailed as possible. And I ask that the recipient read it, reread it again, let things resonate, research, colors, animals, anything in there that led to research and let things resonate. And animals, like any sign, they have flip sides to them as far as meanings go. So they'll have a positive attribute and a negative attribute. So it's letting Google is terrible about this because I know what you mean. You go and you want to go to the best meaning possible. Oh, this must be great. Or if it's a if it's an animal or a color or a dream about death, it's automatically fear that's instilled. It's, oh, that's horrible.
Yep.
I'm going to die. And that's not necessarily the case. But in your dreams, you weigh both and look at, okay, what was the rest of the dream about? Or if during your daylight hours, seeing an owl, okay, what was going on when I saw the owl? What was I thinking about? It's messages. You're given messages through animals, through your dreams. Apparently, you get a lot through dreams.
Yeah.
I don't most of the time, but it's really letting those meanings resonate, because then if you go down the Google rabbit hole or the YouTube
Yeah.
rabbit hole, man, all of a sudden you're ending up in a hoot owl's nest in a barn in the middle of the Pleiadian Council or something like that.
Hey, I've been to many of those, so that's okay. Um,
In the
but
younger
I
days.
mean, you kind of say it perfect. Like it started as a dream, and then they started to manifest in my natural world. I'd be out on a hike and I'd see an owl, and I'd go, "Oh man, I'm not used to seeing owls. That's cool." I'd snap a picture, or I'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and look out the window, and there'd be one silhouetted on our fence, and or they wake me up talking to me in the middle of Mesa, Arizona, or Tucson, Arizona, when I'm sitting in a hotel room. And it's just kind of gotten to the point now where I've just accepted that it's a guide and a helper and something, a reminder, that I'm not alone in this. So,
That's what I was going to say. It's a reminder when you
yeah,
need it. And it's
yep,
usually exactly when you need it is when these type things happen, or they appear, or you'll hear them.
yep,
Uh,
no doubt. Well, and as you can imagine, like it's funny looking back at it now. It's funny. At the time, it was devastating because I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was absolutely losing my mind, that I was having this experience, and that if I brought it up to people, they thought I was a whack job. So I just kind of kept quiet about it and just kind of went along my way. And, coming to find out, it was a huge gift. So,
yeah. And being, to score a 19 out of a 20 on a test like that, which I don't know how they quantify that, but still, that's doggone high to be. And the traits of being sensitive like that, they tend to run within families. So to be sensitive like that, it's you can't help but notice these things come up. And unlike a lot of people, you take notice and heed the sight or the sound and think this means something, instead of just looking at it as being a coincidence.
yeah, no doubt. Yeah, there's no more coincidences. I used to think
No.
there were. I used to think there were, but now it's just kind of like, I mean, Jeff, you reached out last Saturday and just said, "Hey, I'm really kind of feeling a push and a call to get this thing rolling." And I didn't share it with you, but I've felt the exact same way. So to hear that and have that confirmation, or that synchronicity, or that coincidence that we were both kind of feeling that nudge, is how I kind of follow truth. It just feels right. So,
Yeah, and I don't think I mentioned to you that when I was reaching out to people, and I mentioned to you about the other person that I used to work with at organization, media organization. The day I reached out to her, she had her phone in her hand, reaching out to me. At the
hmm,
same time, my message came through, and she's never reached out to me. I mean, we're Facebook friends and all this, but she's never messaged me about things. And for her to do that, I've had that happen so many times, even with trying to get people interested in the podcast, or people contacting me. Everyone hears about the stories of, oh, I picked my phone up to call you right before, you called me. And that's not a coincidence. There's a reason. And we don't always know what the reasoning is. It's like, for the podcast, for me, I don't know what the end game is for it, but I know there's an urgency behind it to reach people like yourself, who haven't, actually, people that haven't come as far as you have. And a lot of them being younger, 20s, 20s, and as young as your daughter,
yeah. Hey, I gotta
because
tell you,
they're
Jeff, like
they're
I needed to hear.
misunderstood. And it's frightening for them.
Yeah, well, it scared the it scared the dickens out of me. I needed somebody normal like me to be able to share about these things. And I hate to say it in that regard, but I think you know what I mean when I say it in that way. Like I just I never had anybody to lean on in this whole process. I still don't feel that way at times. I'm fortunate, like I mentioned my mother-in-law earlier. I'm fortunate that she raised her daughter, because when I brought a lot of this to my wife, um, I think a lot of times when people go upon this path, and I know you and I have discussed this, they tend to lose a lot of their loved ones. They lose a lot of friends and they lose a lot of family because of how they're perceived. And because my wife was raised with a mom who was more open-minded and more of an open thinker, I think my wife valued those traits. So when I brought these things to her, she didn't see them in a negative light. And I feel incredibly fortunate. These are a lot of what I'm discussing with you. And I shared this, like being very vulnerable here. Like I haven't had a lot of these conversations with some of the people closest to me in my life, for that fear, for the fear of losing them. But I'm being vulnerable now. So here we are.
Yeah, I looked at it and I understand that fear. And I think it's absolutely necessary to have at least one person that understands. And I'm curious about with your wife, as far as people are afraid or it's not a believing in what's unseen, but it's when you start talking about things that are unseen and, on whether it's on this realm, which I call the now, or the upper realms, lower realms, wherever it may be. So she's open to understanding that or having she's not just automatically blocking it out.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like I said, I think it's because I mean it's fascinating really, but just some of the stories I can share with my mother-in-law, like when I first met my mother-in-law, and I hope Kathy listens to this podcast, but when I first met her, I thought she was batshit crazy. I just thought she was nuts. I mean, she was doing some testing on us to make sure that certain supplements would be okay for us, and she was balancing her hands, and I just thought it was insane. But I went along with it because I loved my wife, and you know what? Over time, like I was the crazy one for not seeing it and not recognizing it for what it was. Because I mean,
You had to be
um,
ready.
yeah, and I wasn't, and I see it now. When I see somebody who's truly gifted, I like to call him a wizard. Like, man, that guy's a wizard. He's got some magic to him. Like my mother-in-law's that way, and she's fascinating in what she's able to uncover and what she's able to help with. And I mean, she's a healer, she's a light worker. I mean, whatever you want to call it, like she's it. And I see that now. But my wife's known it and seen it all along. So I think when I brought
Mhm.
some of these things to her, this different way of thinking, this that in many, many ways was like completely opposite of what both of us grew up seeing and believing most of our lives, she was open to it. And, fortunately, I've been able to maintain a connection to my faith, if you want to call it faith. I like to call it a knowing now.
That's
Um,
what I call it. Yeah.
yeah, but it's just this, I have this knowing and understanding that a lot was manipulated,
Mhm.
there is many, many truths, and I was brought up in many, many truths, but there was a lot that was manipulated and changed. And I think when I learned that, it really, flipped the script for me because, I read the Bible from cover to cover in 2018 every single day, and I journaled on what I read every single day. And then in 2020, I learned that the Bible was canonized by the Roman Catholic Church, and it was edited many, many times prior to that and after that. And it was just like I started to just thirst for this knowledge of what was hidden, and I wanted to know why it was hidden. And I don't know it all, and I still don't, but I'm sure interested in finding out. So I'm just going to keep digging and keep following my curiosities. So,
Well, you know where I stand on this. I mean,
of
I grew up
course,
in the church too. Um,
yeah,
and I searched and searched, and I always wondered why people came out all happy and, oh well, they've given their life to Jesus, and so their sins are forgiven. And I remember for years and years, I mean, since I was a small kid, trying to get that feeling that I saw on the faces of people coming out of the church. And years later, I started seeing a lot of the hypocrisy behind it. It wasn't okay. They're happy. They were, there was a mask, in church. You look at the actual ceremonial things or the rituals in church. It's basically a show, but behind the curtain and scenes, it's not pretty. And I was part of that, just trying to find that same thing and watching the people sitting in the pews, reciting the Lord's Prayer, but doing it as Father art in heaven, it's just sort of going through the motions. And with what I do and with what the things that you do, how important intention is.
Oh,
And
so much.
focused intention is it doesn't matter if you're healing with singing bowls or Reiki or shamanic work or whatever it may be, or just sitting in church and praying for someone. If your intention is focused, you get results.
Hmm. You are so spot on, man. That's
Yes.
awesome.
And it's setting everything else about yourself aside. Say you're praying, or if I'm working for someone else on their behalf, setting all of that aside for however long it is, for say a shamanic journey or a Reiki session, or still human, it comes back. You still have to live in this world, but setting it aside. But to watch the people in church just kind of go through the motions. And for me, it was watching the first 20 minutes of every church service being about the financials, and then
Yeah.
going to the plate before anything else, before the first hymn. It was
Yeah.
so eye-opening. And I know there are good people that are very spiritual that go to church, and I'm not going
Of
off
course.
on
Yeah.
that. But there's so much too, like so many with the that wear those masks and that go home after church and just kick back and play bunco and get drunk, and but they've done their duty. They've gone to church for an hour or two, and they've
Right.
on
Well,
their
and I think
faces, and they've their new dresses and suits, and
I think I'll leave a couple comments here, and I think it kind of ties back to where you're at with everything. I think first I was fortunate. I had a father. My dad was a man who he talked about faith in a manner of relationship. It was all to him, it was about relationship. And he lived that out. And to him, going to church made him a Christian just as much as standing in the garage made him a car. That was just kind of how my dad operated. So I was fortunate to have that. But on the flip side of that, I had a very spiritually devout mother who, believed that angels entered the room when someone was dying and she could see him and hear him singing. So I kind of had some different perspectives there in regards to the quote unquote church. I have a really, even though I grew up like this on the surface, I look like this just, white country boy because that's how I grew up on a wheat ranch and cattle farm. Like that's what I look like on the surface. But like I have some pretty fascinating, diverse background experiences, whether that be in the Dominican Republic with voodoo, or that be in the apocryphal Catholic Church when I went to my first couple of years of college, because I went to a Jesuit school. My father, his entire side of the family is LDS or Mormon. So I have a lot of different perspectives. My very best friend in life is Native American. So he's a Spokane tribe. So for me, like I've had these wonderful experiences. I've sat in a sweat lodge in the Lakota tradition. I've had these wonderful experiences that have allowed me to see that all of these different spiritual practices are an avenue to connect to our creator and to recognize common ground in that and to not fall for the divide and conquer that is thrown at us in every way, shape, and form.
that's
So,
that's a great way to look at it, and it's the best way to look at it because it's no matter the religion or the ceremonial aspects of it, at the heart of it all is the divine. Whether it's Native American, Christian, whether it's Islam, there is a central aspect of everything. And to see the division that's caused by, oh, well, you're not Christian, you're going to hell. Or, Native Americans look at the world, the earth is their church. That's the way I look at it. Going outside,
Yeah.
that's my church.
Oh, there's so
And
much
it's
I love
been
about that.
here. And yeah, I resonate, Native American traditions resonate very, very strongly with me. But the underlying tenets, and as far as organized religion goes, that is where, like you were mentioning the Bible, and the many times it's been edited. There's a reason for that. And I think thinking you'll agree, control
Oh
and
yeah.
power and money. And if you look at even in today, if you look at it, everything that's said coming from a politician is either based in the first half of the Bible, which is the Torah, or the vengeful God, the wrathful God, or it's
Fear.
Revelation. So the red words that Yeshua, as he's presented himself to me, spoke, they're overlooked. The acceptance, the love, which I love, to me, is a four-letter word, because you can love pizza, you can love people, you can love a car, you can love anything. Acceptance is a better term for it, but that's all overlooked. It's more of going straight to, say, Isaiah or something from the first half of the book, the Old Testament, and then capping the whole book off with pure fear mongering. Even though it wasn't written to be taken literally, it does instill fear in so many people. So to take the New Testament, which is so much, it's the flip side of the Old Testament, but end it back on an Old Testament note, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, you know what it comes back to for me is this simply, if we're going to take the story of Christ as the Son of God, right? If we're going to take that story, I'm a father. I have children. I know what it means to love. And if my creator loves me like I love my children, there's no way I could ever condemn them
mhm.
to hell. So that's where it comes back to for me.
Yeah,
So,
I believe that creator lives right inside of each of us.
oh, there is no question. Yep.
Yeah.
There's no question. I'm right there with you. We're on the same page. So,
I've even read where Yeshua was considered a shaman in his time, and a lot of what he did was left out of the new.
I'm actually digging in on that stuff right now. I'm reading about the lost years of Jesus, and it's so fascinating, and it makes so much sense. And I have so many synchronicities or coincidences where this idea of Jesus as shaman, or Yeshua as medicine man, or witch doctor, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, you called me a witch
Um,
doctor.
hey, you're a wizard, whatever you want to call it. Like I said, it's to me, it's all in the same. I mean, we're healers, and Christ says it. I think it was in John, like he says, we're going to do greater things than him.
Mhm.
So
And I
yeah,
think there is a time coming soon where we're going to have to. And I believe that's part of the reason you are emerging very quickly now. And so many younger people are. And for my doing this, because I am not one to like to speak and have my photo taken even. So to step outside comfort zones, I step big time out of my comfort zone writing my book, because I thought the same thing. People are going to think I'm nuts. This is not the Jeff of old. Where's that guy?
right.
Totally different. It's like I told you, I didn't become pious by any stretch of the imagination, but everything sort of shifted in perspective for me. And I believe the same has happened for you. It's like you were saying, a lot of your interest had changed, and things that seemed to be important or you thought were worth pursuing suddenly just weren't.
Yeah, so much so. Yeah, it's a smack in the face, really. I think just kind of what it comes back to is you start to value things in a much different way. Like I value my health so much differently now than I used to. And I just see it in such a different perspective. I mean, I was thinking about this as I was going on to the podcast. Like, I would have never imagined I'd been on a podcast like this, not in my entire life. I just never, I'm
Yeah.
so happy to be, because it feels like this is what's worth pursuing. and I have no idea how I'm ever going to make money doing this, and I'll probably have to continue to find a way to survive in the regular world. But man, this is like, I'm just so fascinated by it and I'm so interested in it. And
But
I'm learning so much.
you have the trust. You know the difference between trusting and wanting and or needing and wanting, and that what you need will come to you one way or another. You have that trust. And that stems, I think, from both your faith from your lifetime and what you know, the knowings that you have now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't ease the anxiety, not anxiety necessarily, but the concerns about how, well, I can't do this full time, but maybe you can. You just never, how things play out, we don't know. I wish we
Yeah.
do. I wish when
Trust.
I journeyed and asked a direct question, I'd get a direct answer, but they don't work that way.
Me neither.
Work that way. And it makes sense because if they gave direct answers, if we knew everything, then what's the point? But you never know where to lead you. Now, when you started doing the farming or doing, growing the vegetables, doing the gardening, was this after all of this had happened, or had you been doing that before?
So, yeah, great question. So in 2019, like November 2019, I don't know why this is, but I was always fascinated by like quote unquote conspiracy theories, but I never really delved into them too much. But I remember reading one like in 2015. I used to get up in the morning, I'd get on Yahoo and I'd go look at like conspiracy theories on Yahoo. And I remember reading one that said the world was going to be masked. And I remember reading that thinking to myself, yeah, right. There's no way in heck anyone would ever go along with that. And I just remember brushing it off. And then when COVID hit and they started to institute that stuff, I I remember it like it was like I just read it. And I
Hmm.
thought, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And I started worrying about World War III and the end of the world and all. I fell down all those tough rabbit holes where I fell for the fear, right? The fear porn, I guess you'd call it. And I thought, you know what? I've got to learn to be self-sustainable. So I planted carrots in my backyard. That was the extent of it. And I'd read a meme somewhere that said, if you want to show your children a miracle, plant a garden. And I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
I thought that the idea of that was cool. So I planted carrots, and lo and behold, when they all grew and I pulled them out of the ground, I was amazed by it. I saw the miracle. I ate them after I washed them, and they were the best tasting carrots I'd ever had. And the next day, I completely cut up half of our quarter acre lot and put in 4 planter boxes without my wife's permission.
Oh
The
man,
next the
their
next
the
year,
world was coming.
yeah, the next year we had raspberries and cucumbers and zucchinis and carrots, and I'd never done anything. It was just a complete experiment. I didn't know what I was doing. It was just me fooling around with it. And then a year later, we sold our beautiful brand new home in a cookie cutter neighborhood with a quarter acre lot in my little tiny garden.
Were you on a
And
cul-de-sac?
we wanted to be, but we weren't.
Uh,
But we were right next to a park. And we sold that, and we bought a 1950s farmhouse on 1 acre that has been nothing but headaches in regards to the work it's caused. But I've learned so much. We went from hiding one chicken because of our HOA to now we have 20 of them. We feed our kids healthy food. They're connected to where their food comes from. And I think, honestly, I think that's so essential when it comes to our health and
mhm.
when we want to be spiritually connected because it is a mind, body, soul thing.
It's a
And I
Native
think
American thing too.
it is
Yeah.
100%. And so being connected to our food is a priority for my wife and I when it comes to raising our kids. We are fortunate to live in a place where our water is clean. It's free of fluoride, which we're thankful for. We're fortunate to live in a place where we can still purchase raw milk. So being able to go to the grocery store and purchase raw milk and then drive 45 minutes and show my kids the dairy farm where it came from, I think there's something really important in that.
Hmm.
And I want to make sure that those are traditions and those don't die with my generation, because in a lot of places they already have.
Oh
So
yeah, absolutely. Money drives everything, and unfortunately, because I remember when we were traveling around the country, going through, I believe it was Texas, and just seeing the cattle yards, and the small calves that had been, I said, there's the veal, and
yeah,
there's the beef, and just it almost brought tears to my wife's eyes, but it was just so disheartening. But to do things the old way, I know I have friends here that do that, not just with food, but with building different types of shelters, or they use the old tools, and that's the way they live. But they're
I think
happy that
it's
they
so
can.
cool. I think it's so
Yes.
cool. I don't know that I'm quite ready to go full blown homesteading. I'll be honest, I've jokingly said, like, I think the Amish have it figured out, but, um, one of these days we might make that move. I don't know. I have this, like little itch, this little desire to do a retreat center someday in Costa Rica or something, but I'm sure there's a lot of other people with that pipe dream. So,
Yeah,
we're going to
you
start where we are for now.
you had
So,
mentioned wanting to be, because you've gone through the first two levels of your Reiki training.
yeah, yeah, I got my
And
attunements in Reiki 1 and 2. So,
yeah, and mentioned it possibly wanting to do a retreat, have or not do one, but to actually open one.
yeah, yeah, I think it'd be fun. I feel a call to that. I mean, I think my greatest call at this point in life is I want to help people reconnect to nature, because I think it's so incredibly important for our emotional, physical, spiritual, social health. We need to be connected to nature, and I've learned that just through experimentation. Like I said, I've had so many injuries in my body throughout the years that, even though I'm still rather young as a 38-year-old, I feel like I'm 60. So grounding and trying to
Wait a
take on
minute, I'm 60.
information.
What does that mean?
No, no, I didn't mean that.
I
Yeah,
was,
age is just a number. So
that's right. I'm 16 on the inside.
there you go.
No, it's where was I going? The retreat. That's one of the reasons when we were traveling the country, I believe I mentioned that my wife had always, everywhere we stopped, we went 24 states, and every time we went across state lines, she was on Zillow looking, because we had lived in Virginia. She had lived in Virginia for over 30 years, and I was a little under 30 years. I didn't want to come back to Virginia, and I didn't want to go to North Carolina. I grew up there, and I thought, okay, been there, done that. And I believe it was California where this house kept showing up, the one that we ended up buying sight unseen on a Thanksgiving day in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Hmm.
And it checked all the boxes. And oddly enough, tying into the dreams, 2 or so years before we'd even traveled, we'd each had a dream, not in consecutive nights or the same night, about this house in this land. I had one about the land bridge. It goes over a creek, driving over that. And she had one because we live on a cliff. It's over a river. She had dreams about that. And this is the exact house. And it's on Native American land,
Hmm.
the Monacans, and it's nearby where what's called Point of Fork, where the Cherokee and the Seminole and the Iroquois and all these, there were ceremonies held half a mile from where we are, believe on the land where we are. Don't know exactly what the ceremonies were, but we were drawn here, and my wife has this gift of the land calling to her, and it's
Hmm.
done. It's not the first time it's done that. You're sort of taken to where you need to be when you need to be there, sort of like getting the signs, and then when it's time to move on, you know it.
Yeah, it's like we say, it's coincidence, right? Like
Yeah, but we're
it
looking to make
just
this place a retreat slash refuge as well, and for me to teach. And I don't want big groups. I don't want big circular groups of people sitting around and trying to teach generic things. I want it to be more of a individually focused type teaching session, where, because everybody's needs are different. Everybody's further along on their pathway or further behind. and they need something different. So going over a lot of basics of is really just kind of skimming the surface. So I want to keep it small and still be able to have people comfortable because we don't have a big place, but it's very doable. And what would make it such a great thing for you is having it in your head that that's what you want and the knowing of what you have to offer.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, they kind of know who they are in a way, they think, but what they have to offer, they're not so sure of.
Right.
And so you're a rarity. In a lot of ways, you're even more so a rarity because you're a guy who is doing these, that is doing these things and experiencing these things and admitting them. And that is, and I think I told you, hundreds of people I've worked with across the world, two hands I could count. And out of those 10 fingers, not even 5 of them came to me willingly on their own. They were pushed or prodded by a spouse or significant other, and they weren't open really to receiving. And so some I could work for, some I couldn't. Most I couldn't because they were too proud.
Yeah.
Got to be strong,
Yeah.
And
Well, that'd have been me probably pre-2019 for sure. Either that or just scared of it. So,
yeah. The scary
yeah.
part is when you start recognizing the things about yourself and accepting them, and it starts changing you. It's scary. Change is scary for everybody, but to change as a person and start questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world and what it's taught you, and looking at it differently and seeing it for what it is as opposed to what you've always considered it to be, even if it was considered at all at the time.
Right.
It's a scary thing. And on the flip side of that, you have sort of a knowledge that going to be all right. You know, when you accept that truth about yourself, it really sort of settles you.
It does. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, I can't even begin to worry wart is like what I used to get called. I mean, I feared everything my whole life,
Yeah.
my entire life. I mean, up until I was 35, 36 years old, up until I started to have these experiences, it was, my parents are coming to pick my kids up to take them out to their house, and I'm thinking about the car accident they're going to be on the way out to their place. Like that was just how I operated. And it,
Mhm.
it just was so unhealthy. And I didn't even recognize that about myself until I've kind of made this shift. And now and again, I'm not perfect. So when I find those thoughts starting to pop up into my head or whatever, it's a little easier for me to go, whoa, where's that coming from? This ain't me. And having to
You
look at it.
recognize it.
Yeah, for sure.
That's very important that you
Yeah.
recognize it and you stop it and then you see it for what it is. And I say you embrace it. I call it the shadow,
Yeah.
those darker parts, and you embrace them and you use them to face the even darker things that may come your way because
Yeah.
it's these fears. I called them what ifs. And when we first moved in here, I had, we're down in the woods on a cliff, quarter-mile driveway surrounded in the forest. And I had the what ifs. It petrified me to think a tree is going to fall across the driveway. Well, how are we going to get out? We're 30 minutes in any direction from a supermarket or
Right.
anything, and I was paralyzed by it. I was extremely tired because it was a whirlwind trip around the country, and we moved in here. And right after we moved in, COVID struck and the quarantines started. So the timing was not coincidental that we got in here when we did, but it still was scary. And not long after the quarantine started is when I started getting and I wasn't really advertising. I don't advertise myself. It's like I know
Right.
people will come and find me somehow. I had business cards made. I never give them out. My wife did, but it wasn't COVID that people were contacting me about. None of them had COVID. It was emotional and stressful. It was like they were starting to, without everything going on, without all the chaos and static of life, going to work and sitting in traffic, whatever it may be, they were starting to hear those little whispers that are always there instead of hearing the outside world coming at them. They were hearing the inside voices, and it scared the crap out of them.
Yeah.
And some did have physical issues because of it. And any type of dis-ease causes disease. And I think I've told you it's like stress causing ulcers. It can cause
Right.
anything. And the longer you go, the longer you hold on to things. And you understand all that. And you're lucky that you haven't gone through the boot up the keister clean podcast. So I'm not going to say it like I normally. You didn't fight it. You went with it, and you had someone there. I was lucky on that in that regards too, but in that
Yeah,
regard
I
too.
will
But
say
it's
this though too. I had some pretty significant physical things come about during all of this onset. I had a vasectomy that was botched. That to even to this day, I'm still in physical pain. It's 5 years later now, so actually 4.5. I lost 65 pounds during that year and a half span when COVID hit. A lot of it was intentional, but I started recognizing the effect that fasting had on my connection to source, my connection to God. So fasting became a pretty regular part of my life, and it still is to this day. And it's mainly for spiritual purposes. And when I say spiritual purposes, it's like the desire to eat. That's a reminder for me to connect to God or connect to source or connect to my creator. And then
it's
I
like you're
also,
giving up. It's like giving up something that you
yeah,
feel you need in order to receive something from the divine that you really need.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, 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 yes. And I don't know if you want to call them upgrades or downloads or what, but
I love
I
downloads.
yeah, I do think that God operates in ways that we think we can try to understand, but sometimes the answer is within. In fact, I think a lot of times it's within, and we just need to get out of our own way. And
Absolutely.
when I don't eat, I get out of my own way. I allow my body to restore and regenerate and recoup and do the things that God intended for it to do. So, and that, like I said, I think that so as part of that path, we talk a little bit about like some of these transformations I went through, but like I've suffered from migraine headaches most of my life, from the time I was in second grade. I never knew what they were caused by. As I started to pay a little bit more attention to my diet, I did recognize how certain toxins played a role in that. But I also pay attention to different things like electromagnetic fields and the Schumann resonance and some of these things that most people may not even know about. And I have recognized how solar flares and electromagnetic fields play a significant role in my migraine headaches. And I still don't know what they are. I don't know if they're upgrades or downloads or whatever. Maybe they are. But I do recognize they play a role, and I think it's related to my pineal gland, but it's part of my sensitivity that we talked a little bit about that high sensitivity.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And
it's why
those
I'm wearing these blue light glasses, blue light blockers for that very reason, because I won't sleep otherwise. So
oh, so it's I imagine you had some headaches during the solar flares. You saw the northern lights. But I wasn't lucky
yeah,
enough to.
yeah,
We had cloud cover. I know people here in Virginia that did, but I have a app on my phone that shows the intensity of solar flares, and it's on a scale from 0 to 9. And I saw the highest at 8 one day. And 9 would have really been devastating for the Earth if it had been directly, even if it had hit satellites in its path. But
right, right.
it could have taken down a lot. But to have it at an 8 at the same time that the moon phases were changing, I imagine you had some headaches and you probably felt that. I saw animals, where we are, we feed the animal, we feed all the critters, and
Yeah,
the squirrels were fighting like I've never seen them before, just so territorial and fighting, screeching and screaming. And it was during the solar flares in the
mm,
magnetic fields, the way it was impacting the magnetic fields in addition to the full moon that was upcoming.
right. Yeah, I feel all those energies. It's one of those things where when all this stuff first started happening, I would tell myself like, hey, you're just going crazy. It's like you're losing your mind, man. This isn't the case, but I could feel it. Like it was happening because I could feel it happening. I wasn't making stuff up. And that's kind of where it went from thinking I was weird to being like, I don't care because I'm experiencing this. And that's just kind of what it came back to. And I tell my wife all the time, it's like, this probably sounds crazy, but that guy gave me some funky energies, or that gal had some great energy. We need to definitely partner with them later, whatever it happens to be. So because I experience it, I feel it, I know it. So
Yeah, that knowing again. And it's a truth. And then when you feel it, that knowing, that truth, it's sort of, it's hard to describe. It sort of reverberates through your body and it's like undeniable.
no doubt.
I tell you, I think we could talk. I know we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but we probably should wrap this up. But I'd love to have you back on.
Oh
But
yeah, we'll
I
do
think
it for sure.
I don't even think I know we didn't touch on a lot of these talking points that you wanted to. We had
That's all
several,
right.
but there's a lot of them on here. But before we do, is there anything else you would like to add about yourself or about your journey or something you'd like to offer as far as advice to those who are just coming into this and to get over those fears or whatever it may be?
Yeah, I mean, couple things. I think most importantly, just stay open-minded. But on that same front, like use your discernment because there's some garbage out there. And I kind of learned the hard way. Sometimes you go down certain rabbit holes that just pull you into stuff that, again, it's taking away from what matters. So just be cautious in that regard. Use your discernment, trust your gut. And then I think the other piece for me is just like I talked about earlier, like find a way to reconnect to nature, whether that's just getting out and putting your feet in the grass, getting out and experiencing the sunshine on your bare skin without clothes or without, sunscreen or any of that. Just live as we were supposed to. We're so far removed from how we were called to live this life. And a big part of that is getting out and experiencing nature and experiencing others through relationship. And I think if we can start moving back in that direction where we start to rely on one another a little bit more, I think we're going to be heading in the right direction. So,
Absolutely. It's great point, with nature, especially that there's such a disconnect. Everything's indoors, everything is thrown at you through the media, through television, through electronics, and going outside and listening to the wind or hugging a tree. That sounds hippie-ish and I kind of look like, but
that's
there's
fine.
something to that. There's something
Yeah.
to putting your feet in the grass without shoes and socks. Some people now, man, when I was a kid, that was spent my summers barefoot.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
like that, calluses like crazy. And
Oh, mine too. My kids
now
make
you
fun of how dirty my feet are.
see, the kids now will take their shoes off. It's gross. It's all this dirt and like it's sad. It's really sad in a lot of ways. It's funny and it's sad, but it's absolutely you're absolutely right. Connecting
Yeah.
with
Try
nature.
talking to a deer. Next time you're out and a deer crosses
Yeah,
your path, holler at him, see what he says back. You never know.
yeah.
So,
I do that. I played with a
same.
black widow spider one time and even
You're
named
not
it.
going to catch me doing that, though. I'm not there yet. I'm not ready
Yeah.
for that medicine, I don't
And
think. So,
snakes. I overcame a lot of fears I was afraid of spiders and afraid of snakes. Now you see, I've got a snake tattoo all the way up my arm. It's where the owl is your guide and
yeah.
protector. The snake is for me. And every home we've ever lived in, my wife and I, when we first gotten there, at the door has been a black snake.
Oh, wow. That's
And
sweet.
yeah, moving things in, there's a black snake.
Oh, that's
And whether it
cool.
was Northern Virginia or here in Central Virginia, where you, of course, more prominent, but I don't see them all the time. But it
Hmm.
was right there. And so I took notice of that. Going out in nature is the only way to do that.
Yeah. Well,
Where,
it's got medicine. There's medicine for you and everything, whether it's
yeah.
plant, whether it's an animal, whether I mean, you and I talked about it, and like you said, we could keep going on and on, but like whether you hear it in the song lyrics or
Hmm.
name it, there's always a message out there for you, but you just have to be present enough to listen. So,
Yeah. That's the key is being open enough to catch it. Song lyrics, song that you've heard a million times in your life and sang along to, and all of a sudden you're singing or you hear the song and has that lyric always been in there? Because it really means something right now.
Yeah, that was direct. That was really
Yeah.
direct.
Yeah, it means something totally different. That was a big one for me when I wasn't lucky to come through unscathed like you have, with
Right. No,
with
we've
the
talked
awareness.
about that.
But songs played a huge role, and lyrics played a huge role in my understanding of what was going on, just like the animals do now. Back then, it was music, and it could be anything from Jimmy Buffett to bands I never heard of at the time, like Seether and a song called "Fake It." Spoke to me big time. If you ever listen to the song, you'll probably understand why. But we'll let this rest here. But Dan, I appreciate you coming on. If people want to reach you, you had given me your X address, formerly
Yeah.
Twitter. Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is that a way that they
Yeah.
can reach
Yeah.
you?
It's at Farmstead Dad. Farmstead Dad is 2 words. Don't combine the D's. There's 2 separate D's there in the middle. So Farmstead Dad on X is probably the best way. I mean, I've got Instagram and stuff, but be honest with you, I don't even check it. So X is the main place. If someone wants to jump on there and shoot me a direct message or whatever, I'd be happy to connect. So
Yeah. So anyone listening, you have questions or you're resonating with things Dan's saying, he's open to receiving your messages or your questions. And I know for a fact that he will be genuine and honest in his responses and provide as much help as he can. Take him up on
yeah,
that.
no doubt. Well, Jeffrey, thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so
Dan.
much. Really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and be a little bit vulnerable, but also just sharing a love, a passion, and a desire to continue to grow. So thank you.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you. You're more than welcome. And I'm very fortunate to have found you as a friend. I consider you a friend because I have a million acquaintances, but
Yes,
like you
sir.
say, finding someone that you can confide in and talk about these things is not that easy. And it's more than a brotherhood. It's like being a family member.
Yeah,
So
I'm right there with you. Feel the same
I'm
way.
very grateful. I'm grateful for that. So,
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
all right. Thank you, Dan.
All righty.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Everyday Shaman. Please join me each week as we will explore new topics that I hope will inspire, educate, astound, and possibly confound listeners. If you have topic suggestions, if anything in this episode resonated with you, or you care to be a guest, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me through my website, www.everydayshaman.net, or email me at jeffreybrunk@everydayshaman.net. You can also find my personal memoir, The Everyday Shaman, One Man's Journey into the Miraculous, on my website and on Amazon.com.